Hey everyone, real quick before we jump into today's episode. Former guest of the show, Noam Levenberg, has recently started a plugin company called Safari Pedals. And let me tell you, the plugins sound amazing. You have to check out the Gorilla Drive on your kick drums. Seriously, it adds so much life and excitement. He's offering listeners of the show 20% off with the coupon code SecretSonics20. And of course, there's a 14-day trial if you want to check it out. So go have a look. There's a link in the show notes below. All right, on to the episode. Hey everyone, welcome back to Secret Sonics. This is episode 183 with Philip Weinrobe. I had a great chat with Philip. We talked about so many things. This was actually a very cerebral episode for me, really eye-opening, tons of interesting takeaways here. Some of the things we talked about were how he accidentally got into recording by building studios for various people, including Shahzad Ismaily. We talk about how record making is a series of thousands of decisions and how he tries to simplify the process. Why he's against playback of recorded takes. How he uses short bursts of audio to get a bigger picture of the sonic landscape. He talks about avoiding headphones at all costs, working within the constraints of the human brain. We talk about recording for bleed, off-axis mic coloration, room treatment, never referencing other mixes on studio monitors. We talk about never bouncing files pre-mix. He talks about keeping consistent but limited work hours, saying yes to opportunities, and everything in between. This was really an amazing chat. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode as much as I did. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Philip Weinrobe coming up right here on Secret Sonics. Hey everyone, if you're a music studio professional who wants to build deeper relationships with better clients, former guest of the show, Carl Bonner, has created some free educational resources for you. The link is in the show notes below, so go check it out. You're listening to Secret Sonics, a podcast exploring the creative side of music production. Join us weekly for honest conversations with real-world music producers and audio professionals. Hello, and welcome back to Secret Sonics. I'm your host, Ben Wallach. My guest today is Philip Weinrobe. Philip is a producer, recording, and mix engineer based out of Brooklyn, New York, primarily working out of Sugar Mountain. He's worked with artists such as Adrianne Lenker, Florist, Theo Katzman, Alanis Morissette, and many, many more. I actually discovered Phil because of his work with Theo Katzman, and I reached out to have him on the show, which he's graciously agreed to do. So with all that to say, welcome to Secret Sonics, Phil.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, it's a total pleasure. So I'd love to learn a little bit more about your story, your origin story, if you will. Tell me a bit about how you ended up doing this, all the crazy things you're doing in production, mixing, recording, all these things.
I honestly kind of accidentally fell into this line of work. I grew up playing music. I've been playing music since I was 8, I guess. Played in bands throughout middle school and high school, and I had a 4-track recorder, so I was always interested in recording and machines and that kind of stuff. And then I just slowly kind of picked up all these little tiny recording skills, learning how to record my band in college, looking over the engineer's shoulder, at different times when my bands were recording in studios, really small little projects. I ended up moving to Brooklyn to try to be a musician. Had no intention of working in recording at all. And then I met a guy at a restaurant that I was working at, waiting tables, who had a rehearsal space that he wanted to know if my band wanted to rehearse at his rehearsal space. He had a free slot. And I was like, yeah, let's go check it out. And it was actually a recording studio, not a rehearsal space, that had been shut down. And there was a boarded up control room. And he was like, yeah, and if you want to do this, I'll give you a key to that control room to store things in. You can store guitar amps in there. And I was like, oh, that's cool. And so I remember looking through this ripped apart control room that had a desk and racks, but nothing was in them and cables everywhere. And then I asked him if I could try to make it work again. And he said yes. So I brought over a computer and I think an Avid 002R that I had at my house. I don't know if you remember those Avid 002Rs. That was the early 8-channel interface. They were really cool. And I got the control room to talk to the live room again, and it was really fun. And I recorded some stuff with my band, and I recorded one other band. And then Mike was like, yo, I'm giving the landlord back the rehearsal space. You gotta move your stuff out. And I was like, no, don't do it. I'll pay all the rent. And so I started paying all the rent. I brought in a few other engineers, and I just through asking friends, figured out how to turn it back into a studio. And through that process, I realized that oh, this is really fun to like goof around the studio. I wasn't even making records, and I literally was just making this space function. Like, and I was like 22. I had no idea what even functioning was. It was just really like, can you plug a mic in and get sound in the computer? That was my only like concern. I didn't know anything about like workflow or like what makes a record good or anything. And then through that, I had to like find engineers to like come work out of that space. And this would have been like 2006, 7. And so of course I just turned to Craigslist, and I just made a bunch of Craigslist posts that were like, yo, I got this studio in the Lower East Side on Rivington Street. Like, who wants to be an engineer here? Like, just like split the rent with me. Just like throw me rent money each month, and you can like sign out time on a calendar. And I met a bunch of really cool people like that. But the most consequentially was I met Shahzad Ismaily through that, who's one of the great musicians in New York and on Earth, and has played with Laurie Anderson, Yoko Ono. He's in Mark Ribot's band. He just is all over the new Feist record. I mean, so much, so many things. Shahzad is a master. And he hit me up. I didn't know who he was at the time. I was like, yo, I want a spot. And we kind of struck up this friendship and this working relationship at this studio. And he had always been like, I'm going to build a studio. I was like, cool, man. And I was working a full-time job at the time. This was like just for fun. Like, this was a place to go make music for me for fun. Other people were working out of there. I don't know what they were doing. I was not a recording engineer. And then Shahzad was like, yo, I bought a building in Prospect Heights, and I love what you've done with this studio on Rivington, which was insane of him to say because it was not cool. I mean, it was cool, but it wasn't really cool. That being said, it still exists, and it's actually awesome.
Gotta check this place out now.
No, it actually, I mean, it's rad, but it's super rad. It's really, really cool. It's very humble though. It's like you wouldn't like walk in there and be like, whoever made this needs to build me a fancy studio. You'd be like, oh, this is a vibey like clubhouse that you can make a record in, and that's rad, and you can make a great record down there. But Shahzad was like, you need to build my studio. And like, I went and saw it. He bought a building in Prospect Heights, a 3-story row house, kind of brownstone-y kind of building. And he was like, let's turn the whole first floor and basement into a studio. And basically like signed over his entire bank account to me and was like, cool, let me know when it's done. And like kind of pieced the hell out of there. And,
what?
And I was like,
crazy story.
Yeah, I was like, oh my God. We brought in a guy named Eli Cruz from San Francisco to help. He's made a lot of great records, Tune Yards, and oh my God, just so many records. But those Tune Yard records are sick that he made. Worked with Deerhoof, works with everybody. Eli, I started the project. I worked on it for like a couple years by myself. And then Eli came over and we kind of worked on it together. And we ended up building the studio called Figure 8 Recording in Prospect Heights. That's a really lovely studio that we kind of designed and built from the ground up. I mean, me and Eli didn't like, swing a hammer. We're not that skilled, but we watched other people swing hammers and told them where to swing them. And yeah, that's an amazing studio, and that studio has gone on to make just at this point hundreds of amazing records. And Shahzad like basically came back when we were like, the studio's done, and he like walked in, and I remember him walking in and kind of be like, cool, and we like set him up in the live room and put a microphone in front of him, and all he did was go like rub his hands together in front of the mic. And he was like, I love it. It's great. It's so cool. But we have a beautiful like 30 channel Neve 53 series in there, in the upstairs room. The downstairs room has an SSL, tons of amazing gear. Shahzad collected so much amazing gear over the years. And then we just all started working and making records there. And that's where I knew how to record. I knew how to make things work in Pro Tools, and I knew signal flow, but I really learned how to make records working out of that studio, Figure 8 Recording, just as a freelance engineer. As soon as it opened, we were just, we were out of, Shahzad wasn't paying us. We were just freelance engineers, and we just, told all our friends that this studio existed, and everyone was booking it, and we were busy. I lived upstairs from the studio at the time, and Eli lived above me. So Eli's on the 3rd floor, Phil's on the 2nd floor. Neve is on the ground floor and SSL's in the basement. And Shahzad was basically like sleeping on couches and cars all over the neighborhood. And it was a really fun time. This would have been like the early 2012 to well, the studio still exists today.
About a decade ago.
Yeah, about a decade ago. Yeah, and that's how I really got like really started doing this professionally. Right around that time too, right when the studio opened, or right before I left my job, my full-time job, which was not in music. And I was like, what am I going to do now? And I was like, I guess I'll just like work at this studio I just built, I guess. I mean, it was like kind of like, I don't know if I would have done it, honestly, if I still had my job. But then through that, I met like amazing people. One of the most consequential in the beginning was Damien Rice came in because Shahzad plays with Damien, and Damien was in town, and Shahzad got Damien and Sam Amadon over like one night at like midnight and called me. He was like, Phil, get out of bed, come down and like record us improvising for a couple hours. And so I did that, and through that I like kind of hit it off with Damien. Then I ended up working with Damien for years. We traveled all over the world, made tons of records that I'm sure he'll never put out. And so just started just doing a lot of stuff. And through the studio, Adrianne Lenker from Big Thief was the waitress at the ramen shop down the street. So like we would just like go have lunch, and like Adrianne was our waitress, but we didn't know that she was Adrianne Lenker. She wasn't really like, no one knew who she was. She was just the ramen waitress. And then like I remember a few weeks later, she was in the studio with my friend Sam Owens, who has a project called Sam Evian. He's an incredible producer and artist. And he was recording his friend Adrianne, who was the waitress down the street, and her new band, Big Thief. And they were like in the studio. I don't think they'd ever played a gig, and they were playing the song Paul, and I like happened to like be sitting in the control room when they were like cutting this demo, and I just turned to Sam. I was like, this is maybe the best song I've ever heard. Like, what the fuck is going on in here? And now they're like, international rock stars. Yeah. Massive. And through that, like I became very, very good friends with the whole band, and I ended up going on tour with that band for a number of years, made records with everybody in that band now and at different ways. James and I just made the new Westerman record, which is coming out on Partisan in I think a few weeks. They've already put out a few singles. Buck and I made one of Buck's solo records. I've made Adrianne's last record, Songs and Instrumentals, and we actually have a new record sitting on tapes right behind me that you can't see. That'll be coming out on 4AD sometime next year. It's unbelievable. It's so amazing. And Max and I have a pile of like recordings we've made. We make like experimental ambient music together. So yeah, I kind of just stumbled into it, made all these friends, and then just started making records with them, and then started kind of refining my process. And through that, word of mouth, just kind of like, now I just make records all the time. And eventually Shahzad needed his apartment back. He needed a place to live. He was sick of like sleeping on couches, and his mother needed a place to live, and he had a daughter, and it was just time for him to have a house. So he asked if he could have his apartment back. Of course he can. And I went and looked for a place of my own to kind of do something similar to what he did, get a house and put a studio in that house. And so I got this place in Bed-Stuy and worked with the great Jim Keller of Sontis, which is a studio design build firm here in New York. And we designed and built this studio that I'm sitting in right now, Sugar Mountain, which is a kind of a mixing first, but it's also a tracking studio. It's just a single open floor plan. And so now I'm just down here 5 days a week, and this is now I was full-time before. Now this is all I do. So that's kind of how I stumbled into it.
That's such an interesting
I never like went to school or anything.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you were a good hang, and that's probably why like the musicians just kept hanging out with you, like, oh, Phil's fun to hang with, I don't know. Maybe I'm just inferring.
I think it's a good hang.
You got along with
and
people,
also I'm very opinionated. And I think in a studio environment, like, having a strong opinion is very helpful. Even if the opinion isn't good. I hope mine is useful, but if it's not useful, at least it's strong. And that can at least like lead to action.
Interesting. Can you elaborate or give an example of like a strong opinion you had that led to some sort of creative choice on a record?
Oh man, I mean,
too many to count,
that's
probably.
that's kind of my whole process. The record making process is really kind of just a complex web of like thousands, probably millions of interconnected decisions that you have to make all the time, and they all are feeding back on each other, and it's really hard to figure out which ones are going to be important and critical and deserve attention and which ones just need to happen fast.
Wow. That's such a great way of putting it.
And so I kind of have a bit of a philosophy where I think that because it's too complicated to understand, the best thing you can do is just kind of like try to flatten everything as much as possible and simplify as much as possible.
What do you mean when you say flatten?
I mean flatten in that, like, I don't know if that guitar part or that drum part or this incense, I don't know which one is the most important. And we could sit and try to figure out which one is the most important, but instead, let's just pretend that they're all the most important. Let's like not assign a hierarchical value to these things. There are a few things that get hierarchical value, obviously. The vocal, the song, my chair, these are very important things to making a record. But everything else is like, it's just too hard to know. And one thing that I find that really like kills a record or kills a session or kills a vibe is like just obsessing over really anything, whether that's like sitting around while we like try to figure out the best bass line, or sitting around while we like shoot out 6 vocal mics, or like anything that like people normally do. I find those things to be detrimental most of the time. Like, oh yeah, let's try a different mic on the kick drum. Why? It sounds like a kick drum. Like there's a mic, it's right next to it. Like my thing is like, let's just make as many decisions as we possibly can. Once they're made and they're interacting with the whole organism, that's when we can analyze it. And that's when we can analyze it effectively and quickly and with confidence. But like when I'm just listening to that kick drum mic and I pull it up on the board, I don't know. What do you mean it doesn't sound good or it sounds good? There's no way to know that. I can't know if that kick drum mic sounds good until I hear it with the synthesizer. And I don't know if that synthesizer sounds good until I hear it with the acoustic guitar. And I don't know if that sounds good until the delay is on the vocal. So the delay isn't even on the vocal yet. And you're telling me the kick drum mic needs to be known if it's good or not. So when I say flatten, I mean like, let's just pretend that all of that stuff is exactly the same and essentially almost as like valueless. It's not that like everything has high value. It's actually everything is nothing. So flattened hierarchically.
Got it. Yeah. It's almost like you're like running an experiment. And it's like, until we see the experiment through, we can't necessarily evaluate the, whatever the results are.
Exactly. So within
experiment.
that structure, you have to make a lot of decisions. And those decisions need to be like fairly bold because you're making them kind of blind. And so it really permeates like everything I do. But one example I guess that I'm like into these days is of like a strong opinion that you asked, what's an example of a strong opinion that you've had in the studio that has like affected the creative process in some way? And so one strong opinion I have right now, and by the way, my strong opinions change all the time. So by the time this podcast comes out, I'm gonna be like, wait a minute, I don't believe that anymore. But a strong opinion that I have right now, and I've had now for almost a year, over a year, is that I think playback is very bad. And I don't believe we should be listening back to the things we record. And that has been an interesting one to execute because turns out they really like to hear what they just recorded to make sure that they like it.
You're talking about while you're recording or like immediately afterwards or both?
I definitely mean both, but I'm referring to afterwards. So it's like you're in the studio, you're with the band, you like do 3 takes, you're like, guys, I think we got it. And everyone's like, great, let's listen and make sure. No, we do not listen.
No.
Listening is bad. Listening is full of, I believe that when we listen to music, it's very, very difficult. I mean, no, it's impossible for the brain to like compartmentalize what it's hearing and do the kind of like an analysis work that we're like requesting of our brain in that time. And that's okay.
Yes.
And that's like normal, and that happens all the time. But because we have that cost to listening, which is like, there's a few costs. One is there's a metabolic cost. So like to like just listen and try to think about it, like literally takes energy. And like we have a limited number of like calories we're burning, and our brain is consuming most of those. And so I want to like keep my brain like at its like highest functioning level. So if I start like burning up a bunch of brain calories to listen back to take 2, which we already know is the take, like what is the like, that's a metabolic cost that like I'm not sure I'm willing to pay, because that is a zero-sum game. Like we don't get that back today. We might get that back tomorrow, but we're not going to get it back today. The other thing that happens when we listen to music, like, and I'm just going to stay on this example of to figure out or to confirm we have the take. I did air quotes there, podcast universe. The other thing that happens is we hear things that aren't part of that process. So we might hear, we're trying to hear the information for the take. So first of all, for everybody in the band, if there's more people, that's different information for all of them. So now we're going to be in information, we're not going to be lined up with the information we have. Bass players like, we got it. And they're saying that because they like the bass, or maybe they like the drums. And the drum players like, we don't got it. And they're saying that because they don't like the keyboard. And the keyboard player says, we got it. And they're saying that because they love the vocal. And the vocal is like, we definitely didn't get it. And they said that because they were thinking about their like X during the playback. And it's all really hard to pin down. Not only that, but we're hearing things that we like aren't meant to be analyzing. So like, how do you disentangle, did we get the take from, do you like the sound of the snare, which we can change later? Or right. It maybe not is in the right position right now. And so now it's like, well, I don't know. How do I disentangle that? And even if you're not thinking that in your conscious brain, your subconscious mind is full of that information. And so that's going to distort your listening process. So now we're in a confused and distorted listening process, which is where everybody is on different planes and we're trying to make a decision. That sounds like conflict. That sounds like the potential for, I like the take. Well, I don't like the take. Well, who gets to pick? Now someone's going to be disappointed. No matter what the outcome is, someone's going to be disappointed. So now we have conflict, we have disappointment, we have anxiety, we have distorted listening, and it came at a metabolic cost, and we just had lunch, and we don't have time to recover metabolically. So for that reason, I have a strong opinion that we should not be listening to playback in the studio when we can avoid it. Sometimes you can't avoid it. But when we can avoid it, we don't. And I've been making records like that now for about a year. It's really fun.
That's really awesome. So basically, the band has to trust you, the producer, to say that was the take, and I'm going to take it from here.
Yeah, or trust themselves. It's not. I mean, it's not like Phil is decider and everybody else just does what I say. We can democratically discuss whether that was the take, depending on the structure of that session and the power structure of what's happening. Like, who's in charge? Am I in charge? Or is the singer in charge? Or is there another person who's in charge? Or is the drummer in charge? I mean, it's every session is different. Even if I'm the producer, I might not be the person picking the takes for various reasons.
Right. But at least everybody's on the same page. Of we're not.
Yeah, it's the listening that's the mistake. It's not the discussing what the take is. We have to be able to discuss what just happened, but we were all just there. We all heard it. We can bring all our biases to that moment, but we don't need to like listen and then have our we already have enough biases just from that moment. We don't need to listen and have like 1 gazillion new biases thrown at us to like fight about it. So yeah, we just picked a take that we did. Or, if we're doing like takes, that's how we do it. Or if it was like vocals or whatever we're doing. And then we don't listen and we just go to the next thing.
Hey everyone, if you've made it this far into the episode, then you're probably a fan of podcasts that help your personal development in the music industry. Former guest of the show and fellow podcaster Travis Ferentz hosts Progressions, a show about finding success in the music business. If you dig Secret Sonics, I have a feeling that you might enjoy his angle too. You can go check it out via the link in the show notes below. So go check it out. All right, back to the episode.
And then people can also stay in the same ear space, which has a lot of value. So like shifting your listening perception, like between whether we're tracking with headphones, tracking without headphones, doing playback on speakers, doing playback in headphones after not tracking on headphones. Those are all listening shifts that also have a cost. It's really hard to, as we all know, to like do consecutive time-based analysis. So like if I listen to a song in my studio right now and then an hour later listen to that same song on headphones, it's kind of hard to remember what it sounded like on the speaker. Our brains aren't very good at auditory memory.
Yes. I literally just had this conversation with mastering engineer Scott Hall.
Oh yeah, Scott mastered Adrianne's songs and instrumentals. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. So my most recent guest on the show, and we were literally talking about how as like a mastering engineer, he's like, okay, A, B, really quickly. And everyone's like, why are you not listening to the whole song? It's like, I can get the gestalt of like the sonic imprint much better if I do it really quickly because my brain will forget what it sounds like.
Yeah. Oh, nothing
to do with listening to the sequence of the song, but like the actual, is this the right move? It has to be fast because we forget.
Yeah, our brains are extremely lazy. Because they have to be, because they're very expensive to operate. If our brains were not lazy, we would probably only be awake for like an hour a day and we'd be like murdered in our sleep by like bears. So our brain has to like conserve energy everywhere it can so we can survive. This is some like ancient shit and it applies today in our modern like comfy world. So yeah, when we're listening to music, once it's playing back for 10 seconds, our brain is like, cool, sounds good. And that's not very helpful as someone who has to work in audio. So we're constantly fighting that. And Scott is definitely right. I do something even slightly more radical, which I talked to my friend about. I talked to my friend about this recently. We were talking about AB, which I feel. So AB is a very flawed system. It's like kind of the best we have in some ways.
Maybe
like
I'm even projecting what I do onto like what he was talking about.
It's the best. It's the best, most efficient in some ways, but man, is it like not useful. And like Scott's using it in a way that's like probably pretty close to useful, but still it's like flawed. Like even that is like, you're like, I wish we all wish we had something better to like understand. And there's all sorts of tools you can get now to try to, perceptual level match your A-being so you don't get loudness bias and blah, blah, blah. But the thing that I really like to do that I discovered actually I didn't end up working with this artist, but we talked for a long time because I thought his project was fascinating. And he made micro music where the pieces of music were all like sub-millisecond.
What does that mean?
Like he would have a piece of music that would be like, maybe they weren't all sub-millisecond. They're definitely all sub like 15 milliseconds. This piece of music could be 1.3 milliseconds long. And then another piece of music would be half a millisecond long. And
just using like, I don't know, like whatever a fraction of 1/64th note is, that would get you to that quick of a thing.
And I was like, send me this shit. And he sent it to me. And the first time you listen to these tracks, they all sound exactly the same. They all sound like this. They're just like clicks. But then you listen carefully, or not even listen carefully, you just listen more. And your brain is like, oh, okay, well, I'll just like find the differences in this stuff because that's what brains do. And then you're like, oh my God, these things have worlds inside them. These are very unique textures. Not unique in that like I've never heard the texture before. I mean, they're like differentiated textures. Like each piece becomes a texture unto itself, and you start to like learn what they sound like, feel like, how they're structured. And then he wanted to like reprocess them through like the Neve, through this, through that. And at first I was like, that's crazy. And then I was like, oh no, that makes perfect sense. This will change this sound. And that's cool. He's even more dialed into the subtlety of this than I am. But through that process, I realized there's so much value in short bursts of audio. And so now when I listen to And I only use this for listening to overall color of songs. So like actually in like kind of a mastering-esque context, when I'm like, is this mix good overall? Not like does the vocal sit well, but like is the overall, some of its parts, color and texture good.
Yep.
And what I'll do is I don't know if you'll be able to hear me do this. Let me see if I can hit what button I can hit. I can hit this one. But I'll have my keyboard and I will go, that's as long as it'll play in between those two clicks. That's like play stop. And I'm just listening. I'm listening to the audio like, I'm making weird sounds. Sorry, podcast universe. And like, oh my fucking God, you get so much information. Go on Spotify, go on Tidal, go on whatever you listen to music on and start doing this across records you love. You will be like, oh my God, it sounds like Radiohead. Oh my God, it sounds like Neil Young. Oh my God, it sounds like Beyonce. Like, but it has no Radiohead, no Beyonce, no Neil Young in it. It's just texture. And you can like get way more information like that. And then I do that and then I listen to my stuff. I don't want to compare even 5 seconds of my song to another song, but I'm very down to compare 5 milliseconds of my song to 5 milliseconds of any other song. Because now I'm not talking about relative vocal level. Now I'm not even talking about, bass attack. I'm not talking about transients. I'm just talking about texture. And it's really hard. No, it's impossible. This is like the same thing as listening that we were talking about before. It's impossible to get texture if you're listening to more than probably a second. I think once, maybe even
that was the number I was going to throw out.
Half a second. I would say you have to be sub-syllable change. Like you shouldn't be able to identify a single sound. You shouldn't have enough of a sound to catch its envelope, right? And if you can do that, which you can with a keyboard by going like this, then you can start analyzing texture, and you'll be amazed at how fast you can do it and how sure you are when you do it. There's no doubt when you do that and it sounds like sharp and brittle, it's sharp and brittle. And when you do that and it's dull, your mix is dull. It's very clear. There's nothing to confuse you. So yeah, I love listening like that.
Wow. That's so cool. It's like a little Swiss Army knife trick for like, I guess when you're getting towards the end of your mix or the middle of your mix or something.
Anytime you need to ask a question of, does this sound good in general? Like a zoom out.
Yeah.
This is a very, very effective method to doing that. I've never seen anybody else do it, but I'm sure I've
never heard about
I would
this
assume
before.
other people do it just because it's so effective and it's like very easy to do in your DAW. But maybe no one else does it. I don't know. Maybe now they will.
Now they will. Yeah, you've let the secret out, the secret sonics out into the world.
But I'll say one more thing about no playback, because I do feel very strongly about these days. Like we did it on Theo's record, and man, it like people were freaked out. Like some people were just like down from the beginning. Also, I didn't like say it until we were like recording the first song. I was like, oh, and by the way, we're not going to listen. And everyone was like, what? Like they hadn't even heard a single sound coming off their instruments. Like, so Jordan Rose, the drummer, who I love deeply, was probably the most freaked out. He really wanted to hear what his drums were going to sound like. And also because I was having him play in a way that was very unnatural for him. So he was playing extremely quietly. And it was like, I think he was both, he wanted to like hear what the drums sound like, probably because he always wants to hear what the drums sound like, because he's also a very good recording engineer and has a method for recording himself. And then also he was like, I need to make sure that Phil isn't like blowing it by like having me play these drums like at, pianissimo. So I think we went 3 songs.
Oh my gosh,
I got him 3 songs in before I was like, okay, Jordan, come in, put a pair of headphones on and you can listen back. But not to the song we just did. We listened back to the 3 songs ago that was already decided what the take was, so that there wasn't any, as much less potential problems as possible, as few problems as possible. It was great. He loved it. He thought it sounded awesome. It did sound awesome. Jordan's killer drummer. Jordan is the best loud, quiet drummer, and his tone was amazing.
Yeah, no, that whole record sounds awesome. And it's like, I know that was like the whole thing, what Theo wanted to do is to make it really be just back to basics, like a band in a room, feeding off of each other, and without headphones and stuff, you're like, it's like gives it that kind of tiny desk thing where you just have to like adjust your own volume inside the room to the other players. And there's a certain thing that you can do in that kind of a scenario that you can't do with headphones on because, you're just in a different world now than the other players.
Headphones are very bad. Headphones are to be avoided at all costs. I mean, obviously we need to use them at many points of the process. Overdubbing, obviously you need to use a headphone. If you have someone isolated, you need to use headphones. But for those reasons, I try to reduce overdubs and isolation because headphones really, really, really distort the dynamic interplay between musicians because people are hearing each other at different volumes for a million reasons. Even if you're feeding people identical headphone mixes, which I don't do, but even if I did, it wouldn't matter because with distance and I have an amp near me, they don't have an amp near me, I'm singing, my sound is in my head, the sound isn't in that person's head, you still have all these like dynamic variances. And so it's really hard to be locked in on a dynamic. But the most destructive thing I think headphones do is they actually mess up your own dynamics. It's really hard to play in a natural dynamic when you're monitoring yourself in headphones. I'm sure people are going to listen to this and think, I can play very dynamically with my headphones on. And I know people can play dynamically with headphones on. I'm saying you play with a more convincing emotional dynamic without your headphones on. And in each context, that might mean more dynamics, less dynamics, more appropriate dynamics. But either way, it's just going to be better without headphones on because our brains are tuned to hearing the sounds come from sources through air to our ears in a natural way. Our brains did not evolve with headphones on, so this is very difficult for our brains, and they just do a bad job. They do a less good job. So yeah, I never want people to have headphones on. That's my first thing is how do we reduce our need for headphones for as much of this process as possible? Yeah,
just that even as a musician, like I can identify, as a bass player, when I'm playing on stage with in-ears, even if they're really good in-ears and the amp is good or whatever, you're not getting the same kind of nuance as you get without it, listening to the bass in the room, feeling that, and also like hearing instruments directly and the bass, merging with those instruments, kind of how you're describing it in the air. It's a totally different. You feel it more physically, more as too. Like your foot will naturally, tap. And stuff
there's
like
a lot of things that happen, and overdubs in that sense are much better done on speakers. And I try to do as much overdubbing with the speakers on as possible instead of in headphones. And even
like dynamic mics.
Yeah, or let's say you got an amp and you put the amp in the closet and you pull the sound up on the speaker and we all sit in the control room and we do it right here on the speakers, and it's much better. And if it's vocals, just sing into a vocal mic with the speakers going. The only real cost to doing that is muting arrangement elements, and all that requires is us to make some good decisions, and it's not hard to decide that stuff. And if we're unsure, let's mute it now. Let's mute it for the vocal take, and then we can always open it back up. And the benefit of doing vocals on speakers, besides the humongous benefit of not having headphones on, which is really the main reason to do it, there's 2 other things with doing vocals on speakers. Anyone who's done vocals on speakers feels these things immediately. Well, one of them you'll feel immediately, and one of them you might not. The thing you feel immediately is that it's just way more fun. It is like so much more fun. When you do vocals on speakers, everybody without a doubt is going to say, that was the best time I've ever had recording vocals. I felt so natural. It was so easy. They don't need to know it's because of dynamic interplay and ears and air and headphone and blah, blah. They're just going to be like, that was awesome every time. And then the second thing, or the third thing, First best thing, you don't have headphones on. Second best thing, it's just more fun. And the third thing, which is really the thing that I secretly love the most, is that you get free bleed from the other instruments into the vocal mic, and that's what makes things sound good. When everything is isolated, and vocal overdubs are generally isolated, when you solo them, all you hear is the vocal. That's really, really hard to make feel good. It's just really hard. There's no way around it. It's more work and it's less successful. And I don't ever want to work harder for less success. So if we can catch a little free spill off the speakers into the vocal mic, that's just going to give everything but that's not the vocal more dimensionality to it. Bring it all into the center a little bit. Give it all a little extra room tone. And that can often be the difference between like, this sounds really good and this feels really good. And like, I'm only interested in the feels really good part. So yeah, that bleed that's the secret free, really nice thing that you get from vocals in the room.
Interesting. So you've totally embraced the bleed, and it's like you think it adds that kind of glue, the vibe, that the extra element that is missing from modern, sterile recording.
Yeah, I mean, coming back to strong opinions, I mean, I kind of feel like I know it is.
Yes.
The way sound. I mean, I keep going back to brain, but the way that our brain processes sound is in complex ways. And the more complex the sound is, the more our brain actually is chill, is like relaxed, the more we actually feel okay. I listened to this amazing interview with Susan Rogers, who was a great engineer, made Prince records and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. She's been on my buddy's podcast. Actually,
she's
two of
a
my buddy's
neuroscientist now, and maybe you've heard her talk about this, but she talks about vocal editing and MRI machines. And so she puts people into MRI brain scans and plays them edited vocals and unedited vocals. And the thing I heard her talking about was about breath sound. And she's playing them vocals where the breaths have been removed, in which people do that. People remove breaths from vocal tracks.
Of course.
I know you say, of course.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my, I'm like literally having like a panic attack thinking about this. And it was so nice to hear her talk about this, because it was a thing that I've felt and I've done. I don't remove breaths ever. Like, you want to remove the breaths, you do it. I will not do that. I'll give you a name of someone you can hire. They'll go remove all the breaths. They can send it back to me. And I will recommend they charge you a lot of money. It should be a painful process because the cost is so high. And she put people in the MRI machines and played them vocals with the breaths taken out and vocals with the breaths, and their brain is lighting up in the stress zones when the breaths are gone. And when the breaths are there, their brain is in a state of okay, of safety. Where do you want people to be listening to your music? You want them listening with their brain in a state of safety or in a state of stress? I mean, I guess
unless you're trying to specifically conjure that other kind of emotion.
I'm not sure that you ever want someone to be unconsciously stressed out. Like, I might want to induce the illusion of tension, right? So that I can release it and create emotional dynamics. But I don't think I ever want someone to be like, I don't know what this is. It's just feels stressful. Like, I guess there's like maybe some conceptual sound art that maybe would be effective by like toying with our subconscious stress reactors, but like definitely not the music we're talking about. She's just like, don't edit it. We never edited it, pre-digital editing. And there's a reason why these records sound good. And there's a lot of reasons, but that's one of them. That's one of them. Yeah. And I would say the other one is bleed. And bleed creates a complexity of waveform that the brain needs to feel okay and to believe in the sound. And we have to believe in the sound, even if that sound is manufactured and constructed and synthesized. I still need to believe that it's real, because if I if everything is in a vacuum and is in this isolated place, then I can't empathize with it. And if I can't empathize with it, then I can't have an emotional response. And if I can't have an emotional response, and by I mean I as a listener, not I as a maker, or one as a listener. If one can't empathize and have an emotional response, then the music is a failure.
Right.
So anything we can do to increase the probability of the music being successful, i.e. generating an emotional response inside the listener, which requires that listener to have empathy, which requires that listener to subconsciously believe that the music is real, is good. And Bleed is the cheapest, most effective way to create that environment. And recording your vocals on the speakers is a really easy and free way to get a little of that bleed. But also just recording everybody next to each other is pretty helpful too, because you get a lot of cross
helps.
benefit from that. That's not just the bleed, and you get multi-directional bleed. Theo's record is all like that, and I think that's part of why people seem to like it.
Yeah, I think people are afraid of bleed because they're like, oh no, now I'm not going to be able to tweak this to where I want it to get to. But it's really like, I don't remember where I first heard about this. I'm actually in the middle of reading Al Schmidt's book.
No.
I don't know if you read it. And he's worked on like a lot of these classic records in Capitol Studios. And it's like all in all the microphones are up in the same room, on the strings and the horns and the vocalist even. And it's just like, that's, if you have the right mic, I think like he writes about this, to be honest, is like if you have the right microphone or the right polar pattern or whatever it is, then bleed doesn't have to sound bad. It could sound really good, like the bleed could be, we're afraid of bleed being bad sounding, but it could actually be really good sounding if you're using the right microphones in the right positions.
Yeah.
In the right places.
I mean, 100%. I mean, I actually, yes, Al, 100%. Bleed not only can sound good, should sound good. And in fact, I would make the argument that as a recording engineer, that's actually your only job. Putting a mic in front of something, that's gonna sound good. Like if, I've never talked into this microphone before. I put it up in front of my voice today. It sounds good. I mean, it's a microphone and it's pointed at my goddamn face. It's gonna sound good. Like we have EQ, we have lots of things we can do. The challenging part and the part where our job comes in is actually making sure that the thing 25 feet away from me sounds good in this mic. And that's what I spend all my time on as a recording engineer. So when we were doing Theo's record, I'm like, Jordan, play the kick drum. The kick drum's muted. I'm listening to the snare mic. I'm listening to the overhead. I'm listening to Theo's vocal. I'm listening to the keyboard amp mics. I'm listening to the guitar amp mic. I'm listening to the piano mic. That's where I'm concerned about the kick drum. I'm not concerned at all about the sound of the kick drum and the mic that's right in front of the kick drum. That mic is going to pick up kick drum. I mean, it's going to pick up Jordan Rose playing the kick drum. Jordan Rose playing the kick drum sounds good because Jordan Rose is playing the kick drum. You don't need to worry about that. What you need to worry about is the piano mic and the kick drum. And then same thing, when Theo starts singing, like I'm not monitoring Theo's vocal mic. I'm listening to the piano mic. I'm listening to the kick drum mic because I'm going to turn that kick drum up. And if that vocal sounds good in that kick drum mic, then I'm not going to have a problem. If that vocal sounds bad in the kick drum mic, I need to change out that kick drum mic. And so I just mic for bleed. I mic for spill 100%. And if everything sounds good as bleed and spill, then you're fine. Your spot is always going to sound good. People, I don't understand. Well, I mean, I understand a little bit. Like I have mic preferences, but they're very small. I mean, we do, I mean, when I was younger, I would do mic shootouts because I thought that's what you were supposed to do. I thought, let's have the person in the room. And now we're going to set up a U47 and a RCA 44 and a U67. And we'll set up a 58 just for fun. And let's like record them all at the same time. And then we'll all go into control room and like A/B listen and like see which one we like the best. It's like, oh my God, what a distorted, stupid process. No offense to anybody who does that. But it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And you're not even listening to the right thing because you're listening to the vocal, which is the last thing you need to be concerned about with the vocal mic. what you should be listening to, if they're a guitar player, singer-songwriter, you should just be listening to the guitar in that mic. Now that's valuable. I would set up 4 vocal mics and just have them play guitar in the guitar position and then go listen to those. That's important. But the vocal's going to sound great in all of those. SM58 sounds great. U47 sounds great. They all sound great. But they're all going to sound very different with the guitar. Very different. And that's the thing you're not going to be able to control later. That's going to be... Try to EQ for the acoustic guitar in your vocal mic, you're dead. You're dead. You're done. You're re-recording the vocal, and that's going to suck. So always be miking for bleed. Always be miking for spill. And you'll just have an easier life.
Yes. I'm remembering now which interview it was. I was talking with Caleb Parker, who's worked on a lot of the Scary Pockets videos and also Vulfpeck, and he mixed I think the Live at MSG concert, and he was talking about how some microphones just are not built to be good with spill, and that's why he prefers ribbon mics over dynamic microphones, because of the way even an RE20 rejects things on the sides, so the bleed is not as nice as maybe a ribbon microphone would be. Yeah. So just knowing which microphones are going to pick it up all better.
Off-axis color is basically the most important that's the most important quality in a microphone. And the more expensive a microphone is, usually the better the off-axis color is.
And Omni, I think, does it better also.
Yeah. Right, so it's obviously a complicated confluence of variables. You have transduction, i.e. ribbon, condenser, dynamic element, electret, whatever, piezo. The transduction itself, they have characteristics that have effect on axis and off axis, and then pattern, which is really a function of transduction in a lot of ways, or can be, will further impact your axis versus off axis coloration. And so there's a lot of rules of thumb you can use to just help you have an easier life. But yeah, dynamic cardioid, that combination is often the worst for off-axis coloration. Dynamic omni can be better, and there's very few dynamic figure eights that I've ever heard, although I'd be curious to hear them if someone knows about them. And then obviously the best off-axis being a condenser in omni. But those are generalizations, right? There will be some condenser microphones in Omni that just don't sound very good off axis, and some that sound great and sound better. So everything is based on, you have to actually try them. So for that reason, I tend to just use condenser mics in Omni mode all the time, just because I'm very, very lazy. And I don't want to have to worry about it. And I know if I put a condenser mic in Omni up, and then it's going to sound good. Ribbon mics also have...
It's safe.
Pretty neutral off-axis, although the problem with ribbon mics is that they have very loud off-axis. So oftentimes with axis coloration, you're in, and not all the time, it's not a perfect correlation, but you're often trading volume for color. So as your off-axis volume goes down, your color gets worse. That's your game. The game is find the sweet spot of volume and color off axis that's going to work for that specific day in the studio. And it changes all the time. It changes based off how loud people are playing. It changes on the type of music they're playing. It changes on what you had for breakfast. Everything affects this stuff, but yeah.
So even for a drum kit, would you not avoid putting a close dynamic mic on a kick or a snare or something?
I do. Yeah, I only use Omni condensers basically.
That's what you did on the Theo record.
Yep, those are all Omni the kick may have been in cardioid. I think we went between. Trying to think what we were using on the kick. We actually were just changing the kick mic up a bit. I was using a U47 FET, which is a fixed cardioid. And then I did use a multi-pattern mic that I think was an Omni at some point. The overhead's definitely Omni. The snare mic, definitely Omni. I had a ribbon mic up as a kind of a mono I don't know, funny picture mic. I didn't use that much. That was a figure 8.
Yeah.
But yeah, Omni. Theo's vocal is an Omni. Yeah, I just try to keep everything in Omni as much as possible.
Very cool.
I mean, it just sounds better. I mean,
what about like the room, and how does the room play into the equation of doing these things? Because you might be in a room that's not as well treated as another room.
Treat it.
Treat it.
Just treat it. Treat it quickly. It's very easy to treat a room. Just go to Home Depot and buy some packing blankets and just staple them to the wall, nail them to the wall. Like, go get people's coats and put them on mic stands and put them around the room. Like, if you have like $50 and an hour, I guarantee you can make a room sound fine. A room. And I mean like a room in a house, like, or a room in a normal space. Like, if you go to like a giant abandoned power factory in Berlin, like, that's going to sound like that. Like, you're not going to fix that. You're not going to change that sound. But yeah, if you're like recording in a room in your house or wherever, and I mean, it's just easy to change the sound of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So make sure you're treating that room.
Yeah, just treat the room. Treat it temporarily. It doesn't have to be pretty, but like, if it doesn't sound good, just make it sound better. It's not hard. And it shouldn't.
Yeah.
It shouldn't. The sound that's happening, the way the air is vibrating, that's the important thing. So you never want to be being like, well, the room doesn't sound good, so I'm going to use this microphone that rejects the room. That's a weak foundation. I mean, you can do that, and we've all had to do that sometimes, and it's makes a lot more work later, and you're going to be less successful. So the solution to that is stop, take a few minutes, and fix it. And just, go get all the pillows from your bed and like put them on top of the dresser. Whatever. Every room is different, but it's not hard to put soft things against the hard surfaces. I mean, that's really the problem when we talk about the room not sounding good, is we're talking about reflections being bad. And reflections are almost always in the upper mid to high frequencies, and those are the easiest things to absorb with books absorb them.
Yeah, books are great.
It's like just easy. I mean, I'm looking at your room you're sitting in right now, which I'll explain to podcast listeners, has like a pillows behind you and books and a hat and a guitar hanging on a wall and headphones which have padding in them and all this stuff. And then you have a shelf with a blanket in front of it. I don't, and you have curtains. Like, that room is going to sound fine. Like, you're not going to have a problem in a room like that. Most people's rooms already look like that. And if it doesn't look like that, just put some stuff in it. Yeah. I never pick a mic to solve a bad room. I just make the room sound better.
You solve the room.
Solve the room. Not because like I'm great at solving rooms, because solving rooms is easy. Anybody can do it, and it just takes a few minutes.
Epic.
Yeah.
Well, I love it. I mean, everything you've talked about so far has kind of been, based on like how our brains work, how mics work. You have this super like organic approach, and also all the tracks I listened to, before we talked today, all have this really nice organic touch to it. How are you able to kind of capture, I guess you've kind of already explained it, but it's amazing, I guess, to see how you're able to capture such organicness, real human kind of vibes in such a digital, hectic era that we're living in. So I guess congratulations.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's fun to do that. I mean, some of the stuff you listen to was not recorded digitally. So that also plays some very minor role in the process. But I will say, like, this is not like only for like organic sounding music. This is my process for making all music. And I work on a lot of like experimental electronic weird music too. And it's the same process. Like, even that needs to feel real. Even like, I don't know if you know this artist Jan Jelinek. German minimalist techno composer. Humongous catalog, unbelievable. JANJELINIK. If anybody out there hasn't checked out Jan Jelinek, oh my God, you're in for a treat. And every record he has is unbelievable. It's probably good to start at the beginning to this record called Loop Finding Jazz Records. And this is a extremely constructed record. The music is not people playing in a room. It's manipulation and editing and sampling and I mean, honestly, I have no idea how he's making most of this shit. It's mystery to me, which is another thing that makes things sound good. But oh my God, if it's emotional, it's so emotionally impactful. And so I can just imagine that he's probably using if he's not using these methodologies, he's using the neural concepts for sure, and the performative concepts. I almost guarantee it, just because it would be impossible to make it any other way. And it's so, oh my God, it's so impactful. I feel just like I want to cry every time I listen to it. And I've made a lot of music with Dave Harrington. That's like very strange experimental music, and you can do it on that too, and it will maintain that feeling. And I think that's so critical. It's so critical.
I'm so curious how this all started for you. How do you kind of like went down this rabbit hole of like, was it like an internal compass thing, or did somebody like introduce you to something? Like, how did you find this like kind of methodology of like, going for that kind of, I don't know, human touch?
It's partly just an intuitive like process that I've like kind of like fell into, but I've fallen into it through hopefully like trying to be a good listener, and trying to understand why something is working and then why something isn't working. Recording lots and lots of music in lots of different ways, you start to build up this like, secret internal database of like results and processes, and like you're like, why does that keep being good, and why does that keep being less good, and why is this so easy to mix, and why is this so hard to mix, and like, oh my God, people love this record, oh my God, people don't like this record, why it sounds so good. And like I like just like started to realize like, oh, doesn't matter what things sound like, and there's another thing happening, and I've been trying to understand that. And I have read a lot of books that kind of have reinforced these beliefs. There's a book by an economist or psychologist, Daniel Kahneman, called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is it's kind of like it's pseudo pop neuroscience book, not as garbage as like Malcolm Gladwell, but like he's like actually like a respected thinker and researcher. Sorry if you like Malcolm Gladwell, podcast listeners, but come on, Malcolm Gladwell's an idiot. But Daniel Kahneman is very cool, and Daniel Kahneman's book Thinking Fast and Slow is amazing. Lot of great neuroscience, like how the brain makes decisions and deals with biases, and that's made a lot of my job easier. Having a little bit of insight through his research into like how the brain works. I read a book by Walter Murch called The Conversation. Walter Murch is the great film and sound for film editor. He did Godfather, Godfather 2, Apocalypse Now, English Patient, tons of amazing films. And he's like kind of like a Yoda of like thinking about how like sound and image editing like affects our like emotional like landscape as audience members, as listeners, and then like how you manipulate that from the creator side. And man, that book, I mean, you don't need to know anything about film. I know nothing about film to get stuff out of it. I mean, you don't need to even be working in creative arts. I mean, you read that book, all of a sudden you're like, scrambled eggs are going to be way better, I promise. And then the third book I read that has been helpful for me is a book called Mixing with Your Mind. Have you read that? That's an amazing.
I've read some of it. Yeah,
it's the whole thing is worth like reading like every week.
I just don't have like a physical copy, so I keep like reading digitally and then like losing track of it.
Like hacked PDFs because it's like $100. That book costs $100 to have them like ship it to you from Australia. I will say, it is worth it. Like it is worth it. Just go spend. Yeah. It's the best $100 you'll spend. Like we drop $100 at the bar all the time. Like just go buy the book. It's like you will get more out of that than the last $1,000 you spent on plugins. I promise. And he's an incredible.
Slow clap. I love it.
I've actually listened to some of his recordings. I'm not like such a huge fan of that guy's like work. It's good. Maybe it's really good. I don't know. I think the like genre he worked in, I don't know, maybe it's just a different time. But man, do I resonate with the way he's thinking about things. And he's kind of doing this thing in that book where he's describing like ways to think about recording and mixing problems. Also, it's called Mixing with Your Mind, but it's like 80% about recording.
Right. That makes sense.
He's talking about like ways to think about these problems. And then he also gives you like methods and techniques to do them. And all of it's really, really useful. And that book was given to me for like my birthday by Eli Cruz, who I built Figure Eight with, and I just like devoured it, and it's so amazing. He talks a bit about spill, but he talks a lot about listening in that book, and like ways to listen and ways not to listen. And he's not going as deep into like brain science stuff as maybe Daniel Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow, but he's touching on some of the same things. And it's really useful. One thing that I do also with listening that I was doing it, I think, before I read Mixing with Your Mind, but if I wasn't, then certainly after I've read Mixing with Your Mind, I've really stuck to it, which is that I don't listen to other music besides what I'm working on out of studio monitors when I'm working on that music. And that's been a big plus for my workflow.
Wow, really? Because everybody talks about referencing.
Never
all the
reference.
Time, right?
So,
Never
my God,
reference.
I'm very anti-reference.
Go on. This is an important point to
Oh
to
man,
nail
I'm
home
like
for
the most
listeners.
anti-reference. So, okay, well,
Please.
I have a few thoughts about referencing. First is that, and this actually comes from the Mixing with Your Mind book, this kind of idea, which I really, he talks about it with EQs, but really it works for everything. And I don't know if he says it exactly like this, but I'll just paraphrase it like how I think about it and how I talk about it to people I work with, which is that your A-B should always be to your imagination. So what you want to do when you're setting up, we're talking about referencing. So let's say I think to myself, oh my God, Jerry Jeff Walker, Dust in My Boots. It's the last track off of what's that record called?
Here it is, Driftin' Way of Life.
Driftin' Way of Life. Thank you very much. Oh my God, I'm so embarrassed. Okay, so Jerry Jeff Walker, Driftin' Way of Life. Last song is called Dust in My Boots. That song is so beautiful and so like soft and warm and just like, oh, you just want to like just curl up inside of that sound. It's just, I've never heard anything like it. Certainly nothing else on that record sounds like that song. So I don't know what they did, like, and it doesn't matter. So let's say I'm working on a record. I'm like, oh man, it would be great if we like got a little of that Dust in My Boots vibe on this one. Okay, so how do we do that? Like you might think, oh, well, let's pull up Dust in My Boots and like play it on the speakers. And now let's like stop it and play our song on the speakers. Let's see what the differences are and like push ours over towards Jerry Jeff. That's a logical way to think about solving problems. Unfortunately, in music, that's going to fail every single time because the constituent parts of the feeling of a song have almost nothing to do with like how much treble or bass or where the vocal is. It's almost always based on timbre of instrument and arrangement. And there's no way you're going to copy the timbre of the instrument and the arrangement of that song because you don't have those instruments, those players, and that song. So what are we really trying to do? We're really trying to capture the feeling of what you are feeling when you hear Dust in My Boots. So what I try to do in that case is I just literally try to sit and remember the song in my imagination and remember the feeling. And then I might play my song, the song we're working on the speakers, stop, and then like listen in my mind to Dust in My Boots and like try to like hear it and like feel it and like feel what that feels like. And then listen again to my song for a second. And now I'm like, what was different? and I'm just comparing it to my imagination. And then, I mean, and I really got to this place via like failing, because what happens is when you pull up Dust in My Boots, it never sounds like your imagination. It sounds, you're like, oh my God, why is there no bass on this track? And you're like, wait, there's like a massive tape hiss. Well, I don't want a massive tape hiss on my track. And so now you're like, oh, well, okay, maybe my idea was wrong. Maybe I don't want to sound like Dust in My Boots. Delete. And now you're dead. And so like referencing is just the same way that like playback is distorting, referencing is distorting. And there's much more information in just the emotional part that you're trying to get to. And I remember, so I mean, that's actually happened to me on Dust in My Boots. I pulled it up and I couldn't believe how different it sounded than my imagination. And I was like, I should have just gone with the imagination. Now I've poisoned my ears. I also remember I was working with an artist who shall remain nameless, and they were very unhappy with the mix we were working on. We were working together in a studio, and they're like, it's just not good. It's not good. It's not good enough. They're like, I was like, well, what's good enough, man? And they were like, Weird Fishes by Radiohead. That's the kind of quality we need to be hitting. I was like, okay, I'm going to put headphones on and I'm going to level match our song to Weird Fishes. And then we're just going to reference it on the monitors and we'll see. And we referenced it on the monitors, and I swear to God, it was not close. Our track sounded better than Weird Fishes. It did. And I'm not saying that like I'm a better mixer than Nigel. I'm just saying like it just sounded better. I don't know, the arrangement, whatever it was.
In Rainbows isn't necessarily the most hi-fi record, but it's an emotionally
and we finished
record.
that listen, and I turned to the person I was working with and I said, well, which one did you think sounded better? And they were like, yeah, ours sounds better. And he was like, but I still don't like it. I was like, okay, fine. And that just really reinforced it for me. That was like kind of the last time I ever referenced. I was like, this is not a useful process, because he was like, I wanted to sound as good. I wanted to sound like Weird Fishes, but that's not what he wanted. And that's not what anybody wants. What he wanted...
Because then you're just mimicking and
copying. What he
him.
wanted was to have the feeling that he had when he listened to Real Fishes, that transportive, emotional feeling of being moved by art. He wanted to have that when he heard his track. That's a very worthy like goal to have. But you have to be smart and clear-eyed about what it takes to get to that goal. And it definitely doesn't involve like making sure your song sounds like another song that at one point maybe got you there at a different place in your life. And also arrangement is mix. That's the other reason that referencing is not good. Arrangement is mix. That's 95% of a mix is arrangement. Another 4.9% is vocal placement. And then the rest is what we have control over. So when we're referencing, what are we even referencing? We're basically just hearing two different arrangements of two different songs. Like I've never found that to be super useful. And just to be clear though, I'm talking about studio monitors or studio headphones. So I don't want my music that I'm working on with an artist to be coming out of the same playback devices that we may want to reference from if we even go there. However, I am very down to listen to music off of phones. So if we want to listen to music in the studio, we just listen to it off our phones. And someone's like, oh, I love the way that like the bridge hits in this Michael Jackson song. Great. Let's pull it up on your iPhone and listen to it there. We won't get confused on the iPhone. We won't be enamored with the bass sound or like blown away by the horn panning or like moved by the like subtlety of the like, pre-delay on the plate reverb on the second guitar. Like, we'll just hear the important things. The phone is amazing because it just filters out everything but what's important. And when we're referencing, that's really all we care about, because when we listen back in our imaginations, we also only hear that stuff. So like, yeah, it's just all about like that mid-range, and that's all we really need. And so the phone is great. So I do listen off the phone. And then also the other thing about reference is it slows us down. It just slows down the process. And most of the time, there's two reasons I don't like to be slow in the studio. One is that it's expensive. And the more time we spend doing other things, the less time we have to do music, which makes the time we're doing music more expensive. And I don't like wasting artists' money, even if they're very rich. I don't want to waste my time. I don't have that much time on earth, and I don't want to spend it doing something that's not fun and useful. So it's just, why are we wasting our time doing this? And then the other thing that stinks about referencing, which is even worse than referencing Radiohead and Michael Jackson, is referencing yourself. And that is like the most insidious form of referencing, and is for some reason more accepted. Oh, well, let's just like, didn't we have it on mix 1 or whatever? Or like, let's pull up the demo or all that stuff. That I hate even more. And I don't do that. And for that reason, I tend to not make bounces either. So like if we have a day in the studio and we record 10 songs, like no one's going home with those songs.
Oh my God.
I do offer people the option to hold their phones up and record the sound coming off the speakers. And that's, in that way you can go home and listen. It won't sound good, but you can like hear what happened, and you can like confirm that the drummer hit the snare on 2 and 4 how you wanted on the second verse. But there's no reason to like go listen to a bounce 100 times, which is what you will do, even if you say you won't.
Right, because it will sway your perception of the song before it's a finished product.
And the most important thing to understand about the brain and listening is, remember that we talked earlier about how the brain is lazy, and the brain wants to like things, right? Because liking things is easier than not liking things. And one thing that's very, very important to understand is familiarity bias. And this is true across all experiences in life. This is not special for audio. So you hear something once, you hear something twice, hear something a third time, kind of like that. You hear something 100 times, you will like it. It's just, you will. Your brain will file that into I like, because I like is very similar to I know. And you can't disentangle that. You can't tell your brain, oh, well, I'm not going to be swayed by hearing it 100 times. What, do you not have a human brain? Like, because if you have a functioning human brain, you will be swayed through no action of your own. No action. This is a subconscious, inactive process. So for that reason, bounces are nasty shit. And I don't make them. I make them under protest. I'm not going to like get in a big fight, but I'll get in a small fight over them. But Theo never had bounces. Theo had no bounces of that record. There was no listening to that record until there was a mix. And let's see, Adrianne's record we just made, we didn't do playback the entire record. Like the whole people who played on that record, we brought in 4 of the musicians this time. We did weeks in a studio recording. Not once did they hear a single note, not even Adrianne. After everybody left the session, Adrianne and I sat there for 2 days and listened to everything and made notes. Okay, this is what we're going to mix. And then we put away. We didn't listen to anything for 3 months, pulled it up, mixed it. Now we can listen. Once there's a mix, I don't care, because mixes are to be liked, right? So once you have mix 1, I mean, listen to mix 1 100 times. Let's fall in love with mix 1. Let's become attached. Please, like the sooner we can get attached to the mix, the better for everybody. But yeah, no.
Right. Then you could ship the
pre-mix. No, never bounce. Try to not bounce. It's really, it is really, really helpful. Tomberlin's record, we didn't bounce. Yeah, I don't bounce.
Well, Phil, I have to run in not so long. I don't want to cut you off because there's just so much going on here. This is really eye-opening episode for me. I've learned so much, and I don't want to let you go without hitting another couple
we can
of
do
questions.
Rapid fire. I won't.
We'll do a couple
into my tangents.
No, I'm all about the philosophy, and I was a little nervous that we would brush up against the time limit, but I have to pick up my daughter from daycare, so 100%. It is what it is. That's kind of that.
I have a session starting soon. I need to set the studio.
So there's that line in the sand, but maybe we could revisit this and keep going another time if you're interested, and do a second episode at some point down the line. Doesn't need to be right away. Only if you're interested. No pressure.
Nice. I'd love to chat. What are your other questions?
Also, well, I have a bunch of questions I'm not going to get to, but and we're going to skip the sauce segment because people should just go check out the Theo record. And there was a record that I was going to pull up for the Sauce segment, but let's just skip it for now. It was from the Florist record, which I really liked. And so people just go check out both of those records. They're great. Yeah, I guess I'll ask you two questions really quickly. The first question is about creative energies, because it sounds like you have a lot of creative energies. And, some of us have days where we're super hyped to get in the studio, and then there's days where we're a little bit less in the zone. Do you either have routines or habits or things that kind of get you in the right headspace to kind of do the creative work you have to do?
Not really. I mean, I think I'm generally an inquisitive and curious person, and that's helpful. So like I can always find something to like get excited about in the studio. And then the thing I've figured out to do that's probably the most effective is just to have limits on the time I spend in the studio. And that it really keeps things fresh. So I work Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And that's it. And that's when I'm in the studio. And when I'm there, I'm giving it 100%. And I find that I'm able to. And I don't work later than that. And I don't work on the weekends. And I think that makes the work better.
Totally. I'm for that. Yeah. That's great. Amazing. And so I'll just ask you the last question of the show, which will hopefully, will be a little bit longer, but yeah, just to get it in there, ask everybody on the show. So looking back on your journey, was there something that you either did or didn't do that you'd want to impart on the listener who's maybe a bit more early on in their journey of, Phil, keep at that. It's going to get you where you want to go. Or Phil, don't do that. It's holding you back. What would be that like one piece of advice?
I think you want to put yourself in positions to have opportunities. And the way you do that is by like engaging in community and engaging with other people. That is the like heart of this work. And the quality of your work is in many ways secondary to that. So like you don't become successful in this. If you're talking about success as like on my side, on the production, mixing, engineering, or on the artist side, you don't get there by just being good, by like having good sounds or good mics or good songs. Like you get there by having good community and being open to opportunity. And having a plan can be like fun, but like things don't go according to plan. So I would really suggest to people, scrap your plan, scrap any idea that like you're not ready, because the place to learn is in the fire. So like if someone's like, hey, can you come like go on tour with my band and mix our shows? Let's say you've never done that before. Your answer is yes. You know what? You'll figure it out. Like, it's not that complicated. Someone's like, hey, mix this record. You've never mixed a record before. Say yes. Someone's like, hey, can we go record under, the Williamsburg Bridge? You say yes. You give yourself the opportunity to try things you've never done. You'll learn so much more doing things when there's stakes than doing things when there's not stakes. So give yourself opportunities and put yourself in positions to have opportunities by engaging in community, by going to concerts, by just like hanging out with your friends. Like there's sometimes I think like, oh, when I go to a show, like I get requests to do work because people see my face. It's like, that's what it takes. Like you need to be visible in real life. So just do that. Be out there, be engaging in your communities, be engaging in the communities you want to be a part of. You don't have to worry about showing up there and being like, hey, hire me to be your guitar player, mix your record, record your record. Just like be there and be yourself and doing your thing and be open and saying yes. And like, I think that's how you get more opportunities, because opportunities all have babies. That's the way I think about it. Like everything grows new things. So like every record has babies like that aren't that record, because someone will hear that and then they'll hire you to do that record, and then that record will have babies, and then that record will have babies. And so it's like, oh, you thought like you shouldn't go work on that record because you didn't like the songs. Well, you didn't know that the keyboard player on that record he was in this other band or she was in this other band. They had amazing songs. And then they asked you to come do a single, and that single you love, but they didn't ask you to finish the record. But the bass player, their shit, they hired you on. And that bass player is Mick Jagger. And now you're making Rolling Stones records. And it's like, you just don't know how that stuff works. It's too complicated to assess. It's the same as making a record. These are all the same processes. Like you don't know if the guitar is important, and you don't know if going to this show is going to be important. Therefore, they're all important, and you just have to do all of them as much and as fast as possible without a plan. Just do it. Just do it and be open. And that's like, I mean, I found that's what's led to me having like a career. And when I look at friends around me who have careers, I think that's what's led to them having careers. No one's like, oh, well, I figured if I do this, and then I get on this thing and this thing and this thing, then I'm going to be successful. I've never seen anybody pull that off. Maybe it does happen. I just don't know about it. And yeah, that's my advice. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yes, I'm with you. Yeah, you have to, you never know which opportunity is going to be the big opportunity. But if you present yourself as available and you make friends with people, like you said, then you never know. And like, I went on tour as a bass player for Alex Clare because I recorded him doing like a live session on a rooftop, and I recorded that because I decided to do mobile recording. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, you never know what thing you do is going to lead to the next thing, which is like, oh, now I'm like playing on stage in front of people, in a country I never imagined I'd go to.
Always,
you know what I mean?
Always say yes.
Like, you literally never know. You never know.
You can't.
Amazing.
You can't know. You can't guess. Don't even spend.
You can't know.
Don't even spend 1 second trying to guess, because you will get it wrong. Just if you can do it, if you can stomach that thing that you're being asked to do, say yes. Then you're doing the right thing.
Epic. Well, Phil, I wish I didn't have to go, and I wish you didn't have to go, but we have to go because this is the way of the world. But thank you so much for sharing all these insights with me. It was really eye-opening. I really learned a lot, and I think the audience is really going to dig this episode. So thank you so much for your time, dude. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Ben. It was a pleasure chatting.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Secret Sonics. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If you've been digging the show, it would be awesome if you could share this episode or your favorite episode with a friend or two, and or leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcatcher of choice. That's it for now. Have a great week. Take care and dig in. See you soon. Bye-bye.